What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 30 running backs for week 9 of the NFL season. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. I will say, before I jump into tier 1, there's just one running back here that I'm going to be assuming is out this week. That's Tyrone Tracy, in concussion protocol, suffered that on Monday night, so it's going to be a short week. Don't think he plays, unfortunately. He's coming off a great game, but he's not going to be in these rankings. But jumping right into tier 1 here, this may have been the toughest week for running back rankings. I think the running back position is in an absolutely great place for fantasy, and I have like 11 really strong options that I think you can all make arguments that these guys, should be higher within these tiers. I think all of these 11 guys are very strong running back 1 plays, and so I'm just going to go with all of them as tier 1 options. I think they all have high upside. I think they've all been fairly consistent, at least most of them. So starting off here with Saquon Barkley, going up against the Jaguars. It's a solid matchup here. Saquon's been a high-end RB1. The Jaguars have allowed the 6th most points per game to the running back position. So you have Saquon's production mixed with a nice matchup. Should also be a favorable game script. I like Saquon here. Then I have Bijan Robinson going up against the Cowboys. Bijan's been on a roll here, 20-plus PPR points in each of his last 3 games, and this is a very strong matchup here against the Cowboys. They've allowed the 2nd most points per game to the running back position, so I think Bijan is a great play. Now, Derrick Henry here doesn't necessarily have like a smash matchup, but he's obviously been a monster this season, and I think the game script is what makes this a really favorable spot for Derrick Henry. We've seen in super competitive games where it's either close or they're trailing. Those are maybe the games where Derrick Henry doesn't have, quite the monster games that we're maybe expecting. But in this matchup here against the Broncos, the Ravens are 9.5-point favorites, so they're likely going to get an early lead. I do think this could be one of those huge Derrick Henry games. Then I'm going to go with Alvin Kamara going up against the Panthers. The Panthers have been a smash spot for opposing running backs. It didn't necessarily work out last week with Javonte, but I think Kamara is kind of a different animal here. So they've allowed the most points per game to the running back position. It looks like we might be getting Derek Carr this week, which I think definitely just raises the ceiling of this offense. So I think Kamara definitely belongs here as like a mid-tier RB1 play. Then I have Devon Achane going up against the Bills. I was someone who was super high on Achane heading into the season. Through 2 weeks, I was feeling great about it. The Tua injury kind of set us back a little bit here. But Devon Achane with Tua at quarterback has been an absolute monster in those 3 games. 23, 29.5, and 26.7 PPR points. A lot of the stuff I was hearing in the offseason about Achane was like, he's not going to have a large enough workload. He's not going to be getting the goal line carries. Raheem Mostert's going to be in there. And Raheem Mostert was in there getting the goal line carries. But Devon Achane has been such a stud in the pass game. In all 3 games with Tua, he has been targeted at least 7 times. I think he has close to 200 receiving yards in those 3 games. So he's been a monster. It's a great matchup here against the Bills. They've allowed the 3rd most points per game to the running back spot. I think Achane is a fantastic play this week. Another guy who I think is a very strong play, Kenneth Walker going up against the Rams. The Rams have allowed the 7th most points per game to the running back position. Kenneth Walker is the running back 5 in points per game. I think this is where he settles in here as a mid-tier RB1. Then I have Kyren Williams going up against the Seahawks. Once we're getting towards like the back half of this like tier 1, every player seems like they're underranked. There are just so many quality top tier options. So for Kyren here, he's the running back 6 in points per game. Really not scared of this matchup at all against the Seahawks. Think he's a very strong play. Then I have Joe Mixon going up against the Jets. Now on paper, this is not a great matchup here, but Joe Mixon has been an absolute monster. He has put up 23 plus PPR points in all 4 of his healthy games, so he has not delivered a single dud. He's giving you these high ceiling performances week after week. I think it'll be interesting to see the effect of not having Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. Like, does that mean Mixon's going to have this monster workload, be involved as a pass catcher, have a huge game, or will it just kind of lower the entire floor and ceiling of this offense? We'll have to wait and see, but I still think Mixon is a locked-in RB1. It seems low having him here as RB8, but a lot of the guys ahead of him just have a lot more favorable matchups than Joe Mixon does. Then I have Jahmyr Gibbs, my running back 9, another guy who feels kind of low. He's put up 12-plus PPR points in every single one of his games. His last 2 games, 32 and 20.3 PPR points. I also think this is an interesting matchup here against the Packers. not because the Packers are terrible at stopping running backs, but I think this could be a favorable game script for Jahmyr Gibbs. The Lions are actually, I think, like 1.5-point underdogs. So we've seen some games where there's not been a lot of passing volume. Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't been a monster through the air this year, but I think in these games where there is a fair amount of passing volume, Jahmyr Gibbs could unlock a different type of upside with his receiving ability. Then a couple more guys in this tier. We're going to go Breece Hall at RB10, another guy who just feels super low. I guess the reason why I have Breece Hall down here is just the fact that he has not had a good enough floor, especially compared to some of these other running backs. Like, he has 5 games with 18 plus PPR points. That's fun. But he also has 3 games where he has not hit double-digit points. In the previous 2 weeks, before week 8, it looked like he was kind of pulling away from Braylon Allen. His usage was really strong. Then out of nowhere, the Jets just throw Braylon Allen back in there, giving him a ton of carries. I think at some point, in the second half, Braylon Allen had actually out-carried Breece Hall in terms of opportunities. Breece Hall was still way more efficient, which made that decision even crazier. But I just think the lack of floor compared to some of these other guys is why I have him ranked a little bit lower. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Jonathan Taylor going up against the Vikings. Not necessarily a great matchup, but he's just been super productive. It'll be interesting to see what they do at the quarterback position. Would probably lean towards it being Richardson. I just feel like it's kind of odd to bench him. You knew he was a developmental quarterback, even if he's struggling a little bit. But I think, bringing in Flacco is probably to the benefit of Jonathan Taylor. Raises the ceiling of this offense. He's not going to have touchdowns vultured on the goal line by Anthony Richardson, and I think he'll just get more scoring opportunities, also potentially more receiving volume. So if Flacco's at quarterback, probably like him even more. He's a running back 8 in points per game. He's been a nice option. Now moving into tier 2, still some very, very strong running back plays here. We're going to start off with James Cook going up against the Dolphins. This is a pretty favorable matchup here. The Dolphins have allowed the 9th most points per game to the running back spot. A big concern for James Cook heading into the season was his touchdown upside, because he was someone that was not used on the goal line last year, and he's not even necessarily dominating the goal line touches, but he still has scored 8 touchdowns in 7 games. That is great to see out of James Cook. Then I have DeAndre Swift going up against the Cardinals. Swift has been on an absolute tear, 18 plus PPR points in 4 straight games. The Cardinals have allowed the 5th most points per game to the running back spot. So Swift's been balling out. He also has a really nice matchup this week. Then I'm going to go with Kareem Hunt going up against the Buccaneers. Kareem Hunt has logged 20 plus carries in each of the last 3 games. I think this is going to be a very favorable game script for him. The Chiefs are 9.5-point favorites. The offense has been struggling a little bit throughout the season, but they are 2nd in implied points this week, going up against a Bucs defense that is just really struggling at this point. So I think Kareem Hunt is going to get a lot of volume on the ground. If the Chiefs are implied for the 2nd most points, he's probably also going to be getting in the end zone at least a time or 2. After Kareem Hunt, going with Aaron Jones going up against the Colts, I do think losing Darisaw is a pretty big hit to this Vikings offense. I think maybe aside from Justin Jefferson, that might be their biggest loss, obviously minus the quarterback position. So that's not great for Aaron Jones. Still think this will be a good offense, and he's obviously been very impressive so far this season. Then I have Tony Pollard going up against the Patriots. He has been a dominant running back in terms of his usage. He has 16 plus carries in 6 of his 7 games. He's also averaging 4.1 targets per game. So, pretty consistently getting in the 20 opportunity area. This is also a really nice matchup here against the Patriots, which is why I gave him a bump. Obviously, the Titans offense, not great, but I think in a plus matchup, Pollard is definitely a solid play. And then the final guy in this tier, David Montgomery going up against the Packers. He's been very consistent, 14 plus points in 6 out of 7 games. I will say, I mentioned this for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think the fact that they are underdogs in this game isn't the best for David Montgomery. I think he's better as the hammer in the games where they're winning, just rack up a ton of rushing volume, but he is going to be a strong play regardless. Still really like him here in tier 2. Now looking at tier 3, only a few guys in this tier. We have James Conner, Brian Robinson Jr., and Josh Jacobs. For James Conner here, aside from 2 dud games, he's been fairly consistent, 14 plus PPR points in 6 out of his 8. Going up against the Bears here, not a great matchup, but I think mid-tier RB2 is a fair spot. Then Brian Robinson Jr., week 8 was actually his first game below 10 PPR points. He had been a pretty consistent option, has a decent amount of touchdown upside, which is somewhat surprising, given Jane Daniels' legs near the goal line, but he's been a solid play. I think he's a very strong running back too. And then the final guy in this tier, Josh Jacobs. This might seem low because his last 2 games have been the best 2 games of the season, 20.2 and 25.5 PPR points. This is just a really tough matchup here against the Lions. They've allowed the 3rd fewest points per game to the running back position. So there's just so many quality options at the position. I do think having that bad of a matchup is going to hurt him a little bit. Now moving into tier 4, another 3-man tier. We're going to start off with Chase Brown going up against the Raiders. I think game script wise, this is a super nice play for Chase Brown. We've seen Zach Moss kind of be the 3rd down guy, the 2-minute drill dude. So in a game where they're 8.5-point favorites, I think we're going to see Chase Brown get a pretty solid workload on a good offense. Then I'm going to go with J.K. Dobbins going up against the Browns. J.K. Dobbins, he's been a solid fantasy option, a nice RB2. Not a huge fan of him this week, though. It's a bad matchup against the Browns. They've allowed the 6th fewest points per game to the running back spot. J.K. Dobbins has also seen a little bit of a hit in his efficiency. He had the monster week 1, the monster week 2. Since then, he has 5 straight games of under 4 yards per carry. So he hasn't been efficient in a variety of different types of matchups. Now he gets a bad matchup here. Not overly excited about him, but I still think he's playable just based as like a volume play and some touchdown upside. And then the last guy in this tier, it's going to be Ramondre Stevenson going up against the Titans. He's coming off his best fantasy game of the season, 23.5 PPR points. He got into the end zone twice. Definitely seems like he's back operating as the clear-cut running back 1. Had, the fumbling issues early on. Then he dealt with, I think it was a foot injury. Seems like he's back rolling as like a back-end RB2. Now moving into tier 5, an interesting tier here. I'm going to start off with Nick Chubb. I will say this is not a great matchup here for Chubb. Honestly, this is not a great matchup for the majority of this tier. The Chargers have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game to the running back position. I do think we're starting to see Nick Chubb kind of gear up here. I know the efficiency hasn't been there, but his advanced rushing metrics have been solid. It's not like he's just been miserable. He's come back to a solid workload. I think we're going to see some steady improvements here out of Nick Chubb. And I also think Jameis Winston is just going to raise the ceiling of this offense. Then I'm going to go with Chuba Hubbard going up against the Saints. Honestly, kind of tough to rank Chuba at this point because we're not quite sure what the quarterback situation's looking like. Obviously, it was Young early on. Then it was Dalton. Then he got in the car accident, hurt his thumb. So with Bryce Young, Chuba has not been a good play. 1.4, 11.6, and 9.1 PPR points. But this is a pretty solid matchup here against the Saints. They've allowed the 8th most points per game to the running back spot. If it's Andy Dalton at quarterback, Chuba Hubbard's jumping into probably somewhere towards the top of tier 2, like maybe ahead of Kareem Hunt, like behind DeAndre Swift, somewhere in that area, in like the Aaron Jones Hunt area. If it's Bryce Young, don't feel great about it, and this is probably where he would settle in. After Chuba, I have 2 running backs who I'd like to rank higher. The matchup is just so unbelievably bad. It is Bucky Irving and Rachaad White back-to-back going up against the Chiefs. The Chiefs have allowed the fewest points per game to the running back position, and not only have they allowed the fewest points per game, I think it's like by 4+ PPR points. So like they've been dominant against the running back position. Pretty much, no one's been able to do anything against them. So obviously that's going to be a hit to both Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, which is unfortunate because both these guys have been pretty productive. Bucky Irving, 15+ PPR points in each of his last 3 games. Rachaad White in his last 2, 29.1, 15.7 PPR points. I will say maybe the fact that they're super involved as pass catchers, like that's where the upside's coming from. Maybe that could help them kind of overcome this bad matchup where you're not super reliant on their rushing production. Obviously, it would be nice, but you're more reliant on Liam Cohen kind of scheming them up, getting opportunities in the pass game. But I still think the matchup makes this a tough play. Plus, the Buccaneers are very, very low in terms of their implied points this week. After those two, going to go with Raheem Mostert to close out this tier, going up against the Bills. He had a very inefficient game on Sunday, but it still was a nice fantasy day because he got into the end zone twice, saw 2 of those goal line carries. He took 9 of the 21 total carries, so the usage is fine. If he has that touchdown upside in a favorable matchup here against the Bills, I think he's a fine, like higher end running back 3 play. And then the final guys here to close out my top 30, tier 6, we're going Devin Singletary and Javonte Williams. For Devin Singletary here going up against the Commanders, this is like the unfortunate part of Tyron Tracy missing. Tracy was looking great in that game. Looks like he suffered a concussion towards the end of it. So I feel like Devin Singletary is kind of going to step back into close to the workhorse role we saw early on in the season, going up against the Commanders. And then for Javonte here, Could have gone with a few different names. Also considered Tank Bigsby, considered Alexander Madison. Ended up going with Javonte here. He saw really strong usage last week, 22 opportunities. Unfortunately, he did not really make the most of it. Was not a great fantasy day, but it's encouraging that the usage is there. He's getting involved as a pass catcher. I think he's a fine mid-tier running back 3. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 30. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, would love to hear them. If you haven't seen my top 30 wide receiver rankings, those are already posted. Go check them out. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.